Someone asked me to have a go at a game of Deadzone 3rd edition by Mantic Games, which is kind of the Mantic version of Kill Team, which is naughty of me to say because I think this might have come out before Kill Team, catering for people not wanting to dive full blow into a mass battle game like Warhammer 40k, or in this case I think it's called Warpath for Mantic. And I thought, hey, why not? Because it's in keeping with my principle of trying to use what I've got. I thought, I've got a few orcs from my Gorka Morka days, which I spruced up a few years back for this and for Kill Team. And so why don't I use that? So I'm going to show you what I got out of the garage in terms of miniatures, because there are some fun conversions in there, and then take you briefly through the game. By the way, I apologise in advance for scraping the miniatures along the table. I promise I won't do it in any video ever again. So here's a Mantic miniature. I think they're called Marauders, but they're basically orcs. Except I didn't like the head, so I ripped it off and put one of these Spellcrow heads because I like the kind of old-timer feel to them a bit more. That's an old metal Games Workshop knob in power armor with claw and whatever they're called, multi-shooter. Here's another one, Russian orc, Ruski orc, with all manner of gubbins. Taking a moment to give you a sense of the rules of Deadzone and the relevance of those two miniatures I just showed you, those orcs in power armor. So the one with all manner of different shooty weapons, which you can see here, and he carries all of them. He's called a Ripper Rainmaker. Now in Deadzone, you don't take out a range ruler to measure, people moving or distances of shooting. The board comes on a preset size, and it's divided into squares. And also the terrain is beautifully designed so that each one correlates with the squares going up. So it's a genuinely three-dimensional game. And in your turn, you alternate. Alternatively with your opponent. So you move one miniature, they move one miniature. And if you stop moving your miniatures first because you've got fewer, then you automatically go first in the next turn. And so when you move, so you can move. You can do one short action. Sorry, two short actions or one long action. So you could move two in a long action, or you could move one cube up, one square across, diagonally, left, right, whatever, and then shoot. Word about shooting. So you start off with 3 die as a base assumption, 3 dice, and those are D8s. And you're looking for a 5+. This fellow's looking for a 5+, and for each 5+ he gets a hit. If you roll an 8, it's called an exploding die, and you get to roll another dice, which is a fun mechanic. So you roll your 3. There are some modifiers for shooting, but not too many. For example, if you're higher than your opponent, you get an extra die, so you roll 4. If your opponent has been foolish enough to be caught totally out in the open, you get an extra 2 die, and that's a nice 2 dice, and that's a nice mechanic, because instead of, as in many game systems, having to constantly work out, if you're in soft or hard cover, and because in a built-up urban environment like you have in Deadzone, you're more likely to be in cover than not any cover. Instead of having to constantly work out those modifiers, instead it's a kind of exceptions-only rule. If you've been exceptionally dumb enough to be caught out fully in the open with no part of your base or your torso and head in any cover at all, then your opponent gets an extra 2 die to roll. And then, so let's say you've rolled, the person has been foolish enough to be caught out, and you're above them. You rolled 6 die, and it's not impossible you could get 6 5+ on D8s. Your opponent then rolls 3 saves. They've got to roll 4 pluses. Let's say they roll their 3 die are all saves. Well, you've rolled 6 hits. 6 minus 3 is 3 hits. You look at the number of hit points they've got or have left, having taken hits already. And so here, even though this guy's got 3 hit points, he'd be knocked out, he'd be dead, except he's got armor 2. So you would deduct 2 of those. And these guys are really tough, these Orc Marauder Rippers, because they've got armor 2. And if your opponent hasn't turned up with something which has AP anything, armor piercing something, so for example here that's HEW Beamer has armor piercing 3, which would go straight through armor 2. But let's say you haven't got that. Well, in the scenario we're talking about, 6 hits, 3 defenses, well actually the armor would take away 2 of those and you would only be left with 1 hit. And that's why my Rippers in the game I'll show you last quite a while. And hand to hand is not very different. You roll 3 die if you attack, you roll 1 if you charge into the square, you roll 1 if your size, SZ over there, is bigger than your opponent, and it's the same mechanic of hits versus saves and armor. And here you can see all the weapons. Those ranges are, the number of cubes up or squares across, and I won't go into each of these weapons has some cool little rule. Way to fire, for example, just involves re-rolling. Frag involves if it's like a grenade basically. If it goes off, people can get thrown around, and actually as much damage is caused to them by being thrown into walls as anything from the original hit. Moving on. Just to give you a sense how big they are against a normal Games Workshop Orc, they're quite big and chunky. Some goblins from Gorka Morka from way back when. I remember buying them in the mid-90s. But they have been recently spruced up. And I did take a goblin sniper in the game, you'll see, and he's got a range 8 weapon, which I think is basically around the whole table and is fantastic. And I think he got an extra 2 die if he took a long action to shoot with that sniper scope, and his shooting was alright. His fighting, as you can see, is pretty awful, and his save was so bad. So basically, anytime anyone hit him, he started to die. And the annoying thing is, because he was walking around with a sniper rifle, he was worth 2 victory points, which is quite a lot. So normal people are worth 1 victory point. So in most games, there'll be a scenario, you get victory points for the scenario, but you also get victory points for killing people. And there, this little goblin gives 2 victory points. These are some of the newish Orc knobs. They're quite impressive array of weapons. So I could use these for kill team as well. These 3 are old metal Orc knobs, but that's a plastic head from one of the, I think around 2010 there was some kind of Games Workshop Orc kind of box set, the one with the copters in it. And that's a Spellcrow head, sized against a normal Orc knob, a normal Orc boy, so they're quite big. I like these Spellcrow heads generally, but this one is a good kind of commando head, which is good for Orc commandos. There's Orc commando backpack there. And why is looking particularly like a commando useful in Deadzone is because you could have a commando captain. So he's got a shock baton, but what's the difference between a power claw and a shock baton? Knockback involves, if you succeed in causing any hits. You just knock them back 1 cube, and I think you can knock them into kind of walls or off buildings, which causes even more damage to them. So that's one kind of leader, and leaders are really useful because to give a bit of flavor, every turn you roll these 4 kind of, well, you roll 3 specialist dice plus your tactician quotient there. So here would be 5. You roll your 5 die, and each of them have different symbols which allow you to get an extra move, an extra shot at someone, an extra attack, an extra die to a particular pull. You get to activate a mate instead of the, I move 1 miniature, you move 1 miniature, you get to move another miniature in a kind of chain reaction, which can be quite cool. So there, that would be a commando captain. Commando sergeant, obviously they're, just a bit less tooled up, but still quite fun. And that's why those commando heads are quite useful. And then all the orc knobs can be used really as a marauder warlord. They're not very tactical, as you can see up there, but they do run around causing absolute mayhem in hand-to-hand, which you'll see. And there's a claw, which you can obviously use a power claw to model it up, and a heavy bolter. Not heavy bolter, I forgot what the orcs call them, but they're shooters. The pistol shooters. Normal orcs, including some heads from random manufacturers I found floating about the web, or as you can see there, just from the Warhammer Fantasy Battles sprues of various kinds. Orc boys sort of jumping around, prancing in a slightly deranged fashion. I wonder how they'll mix in with the new orcs. I'm loosely playing with the idea of getting an Orc 40k army, but I'm just not sure I want to get thrown into the carousel of mayhem that is any proper Games Workshop game, with constantly replacing codexes and miniatures that become good and get bad and get good and get bad, turning up and getting your team just destroyed because you haven't got the latest thing. We'll see. I hear 1-page rules might be a way out of that, but it is what it is. And Orc Chopper Boys from 40k correlate with Commando Brawlers. You'll see their range isn't that great up there, but they've got a 4+ chance per die, per d8, to actually hit someone, which is pretty good odds. Also quite durable, save 4+, and 2 hit points. And you'll see the array of weapons they have. They can come with pistol and claw, which I think is basically just their fist. That's a basic guy. They can have pistol and heavy blade, I suppose the chopper, and a pistol and ripper talon, which is like a power fist basically, for more points. And they're good fun. And here you've got your Orc Shooter Boys basically. And they can come with a heavy machine gun, flamer, missile launcher, which correlates quite nicely with some of the miniatures you'll just have seen. And the other point to share is, when you build up your crew, you can only have 1 specialist per troop type, and for every 3 troops, I believe, you can take a really big guy, a support guy, like with a really heavy gun. And so onto the game. My opponent took the GCPS. I can't remember what they stand for, but they're basically colonial marines from Alien. And they have access to a load of kind of grunt recruits, none of whom are very good, with the leader who's got a jetpack and acts as a kind of eye in the sky for the 2 mortars. My opponent loves his mortars. He used to take many more. It made for not much of a game, but was entertaining for him, I suppose, whereby in the first turn, the mortars would just fire indirectly and would just blow you up without you even getting there. Tactically, I think he just veers away from something like Orc Marauders, taking a more kind of long-range view of things. And then there are these 2 zippers, well, I don't know what they're called, these dudes on bikes. They're basically just normal recruits on bikes, but they have enormous mobility. I think their long range move, if all they do is basically move with both their actions, they can move, I think, 5 squares. They can't go up because this is a 3-dimensional game, properly speaking, a 3-dimensional game, which is a limitation. But certainly at ground level, they can zip around grabbing, objectives and that kind of thing. And then over there is some kind of little bot with rocket launchers on it. Very poor close combat, but pretty effective, and with armor 1. And I think necessitates having the engineer. So you got victory points for taking out particular members of the enemy team. When I say particular members, basically anybody. Recruits, unfortunately, don't give any victory points, but an average trooper gives you 1, a specialist dude gives you 2, and it will become very relevant. Big chunky guys like my guys in ripper suits give you 3 victory points. That's just the killing people part. But also 4 squares out of all of these various squares have objective markers on them, and if your dude is standing unchallenged on it at the end of each turn, you get the number of victory points. And some of them, like that one, are 2 victory points. The ones further into the table are 2 victory points, and I can't remember the other one it was. The equivalent place on the other side, there it is. And then closer to you, as you can see there in the corner, it was a 1 victory point objective marker, and the other one is over here. You can't see it, but it's there somewhere.
If we target this corner room here where the explosives are, we would expect 100% mortality rate in that room and an 80 to 90% rate within the rest of the house.
Or at least that's what the GCPS achieved by their lead character flying in onto the tallest building, allowing all of the mortars to take indirect shots as if they could see them directly. And despite my best efforts to blast her off her pulpit there, no one seemed to succeed and seemed to get gunned down in return. My guys kind of crawled forward, as you can see, but the bikers were pretty nifty and zipped around, landing themselves for the first turn on both 2 victory point objectives. And though my gobbo took a few pot shots, it wasn't very successful because they're not armor piercing. But the orcs are basically nails in hand-to-hand and getting up close compared to the GCPS recruits, and so I did manage to take out quite a few, and it looked like the game was going very much in my favour in kind of rounds 2 and 3. Particularly my warlord moved to the other side of the table and totally did for the poor dude on the bike. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention, is apparently a conversion from a Games Workshop kit from Gene Stealer Cults, which is pretty fantastic. And those dudes in ripper suits are amazing. I didn't bring out the stats sheet for this one. He's not the Rainbow Mauler, whatever the other one was called. He's a kind of short-range dude with a kind of battering ram and chainsaw. And I used all of the tactical dice I had, which had extra movement, just to zip him up the pitch, so to speak, and just absolutely do in everyone, including the little robot with missiles, which kind of underperformed. And we were going neck to neck, and I'd taken out so many of the GCPS recruits, I was starting to get a bit big for my boots. And you can see that Rainbow Mauler he walks into the middle of the field and sits on the 2 victory point objective, which is great, but I made a bit of a silly error in that there was 1 round left to go, and I thought, look, those mortars, have a minimum range. The first one won't be able to shoot my ripper suit over there. The second one will, but my opponent's been rolling such bad dice, and they're only basically GCPS grunts, and so I'm sure I'll survive, and then he will basically just murder those 2 before they just blow the living daylights out of me, because the GCPS leader with her jetpack was still zipping around, giving them all direct shots. And I thought, look, I can't just sit on victory point objectives. I'm going to get killed. And so I marched up the Ripper suit dude. But unfortunately, the second one took him out because he only had 1 wound left. And I thought his armor would be enough to save him. But my opponent, having rolled appallingly, rolled, 5 or something fantastic hits and took out my last wound, which meant I lost 3 victory points because he's quite a chunky fellow. He's not just a normal guy who gives 1 victory point or a specialist who gives 2, he gives 3. And that meant my opponent, I can't remember what we were, it was like sort of 12 to 13 or something. I was 1 behind. And my opponent just got 3 victory points, zipped up to 16 victory points, and automatically won. And so this is how it ended. For me, at least. Something for me to think about next time, just for fits and giggles, I think, would be to get some more beasts who are pretty fast. Look at that. If they just run, because all they can do is run because they can't shoot, that would be move 3. And then if you use one of your tactical dice, the ones showing an arrow, then that would make them move 5. And their fighting's not bad. Look at that, 4+, 50-50 chance on 3 die. They're likely to run into combat, so that's an extra die. So, good chance of killing people. I mean, I don't think they can pick up the kind of the special things you can pick up, like extra ammo and that kind of thing, which you leave scattered about in all these scenarios. But I think they can hold territory, which is good, and get victory points that way, and obviously killing people. You could even attach bombs to them, and they could go boom. And they've got armor piercing 1, which is pretty good. So maybe I'll spam them, because they're also known as squigs. Lots of squigs. Clearly a case for contrast paint. Anyway, being serious now, enough messing about. Please do like this video, drop me a comment, and share, frankly, any thoughts, particularly any tactical advice on how to play Deadzone any better. And please subscribe so you can see what else is in the pipeline.